Hello, world. My next guest is the country marketing lead at Cisco and an expert in building brand trust. She understands that the holy grail for marketers is to create and boast a brand customers are loyal to and absolutely trust. And here to reveal the effectiveness of branding is Talia Schmidt. Talia, welcome to the show. Are you ready to get radically transparent with me?
Yes, I am. I'm a little nervous now, but
No,
sure.
listen, no pressure. You really are known, especially here in Israel, as somebody who truly knows branding. And I think it's an interesting topic, especially to be speaking about in the new year. But of course, as many of our listeners know, the question I love to use to kick off this episode is, what is keeping you up at night professionally?
Okay, so there are, and this has changed over the years, but I think over the past few years, and especially with changes that we're kind of seeing in marketing teams, specifically in, technology companies, not specifically in startups, but technology companies in general, is, what keeps me up is processes that are longer and are a little bit harder to measure. And I think measurement is really key here. And brand is obviously a big part of that, right? So for me, things that keep me up at night is obviously as a marketer, you want to make sure that you're being effective with your budgets, with the dollars that you're spending. And I think brand is probably the hardest to kind of see the effects on it. A, it takes the longest, and then B, it's harder to measure. How do you measure brand? I mean, I know how other people measure brand. I know what the literature says about measuring brand, but in my experience, like measuring brand, it's a challenge. It's hard. I don't think it's something that we have as marketers successfully solved yet, right? We're working on it. Obviously, there are tools that you can use, and there are a lot of companies out there that's like their value proposition. But I have to say, like from my experience, this is probably the hardest to measure. It's hardest to measure the effectiveness of it or the efficiency of it. It's hard to measure the return on its investment, partially because brand is really everywhere, and partially because it takes the longest. So sometimes it can take, years to build a brand. So basically that's what's keeping me up at night. And then kind of with the state of, technology companies right now, and cuts happening and teams getting, downsized and people being made redundant, I think for demand gen people, right? It's really easy to see what they do every single day, right? They spend $1, they get two, three, four, $100 return, and it's kind of easy to map that, and uh, their value is really, really easy to prove. I mean, using air quotes, you might not see it because it's a podcast, but if you did, you'd see I'm using air quotes. Um, so their value is really easy to prove, and brand people, I mean, and this isn't, specifically the people who are kind of designated brand people. These are not just people who have brand in their title. This is the content people and the social people and the community people, and all these different people. Like what is this 2023 kind of looking down potentially a financial crisis? What does that say about their jobs? Like, what does that look like for them? How can I make sure that my teams are safe and intact, and not just demand gen people, or people who are the easiest to prove their value, but everyone. That's what keeps me up at night.
So I hope you get some sleep, and I can definitely attest here because branding is tough. I mean, it's tough on so many levels, but I do think measurement is probably one of the hardest things, especially right when you're dealing with CEOs and a lot of times the executive team or the board that is expecting you to deliver ROI, which makes perfect sense, right? We want to always be impacting our business, but as you said, brand can take a long time to prove. And as a marketing leader, right, you're literally asking members of your team, whether they're in social or whether, they're in the community building aspects, right? Teams who are experts in brand to spend their entire professional life doing this. And as you said, it takes a lot of time. But how do you know, right, it's worth it? Because we know it's worth it. And how do we know how effective it is?
Right. So this answer really has, I think, two questions. How do we know that it's effective? We, as marketers, we know, right? Because we're living this, we live this every single day, right? And we can see the effect, we see the hard work that goes into it, we see, like not every single blog post needs to produce leads for you to know that this was a good blog post, right? Not every single blog post needs to be kind of go viral over social media for you to know that this was a good blog post. There are blog posts that are good without that happening. So as marketing leaders, I think the answer is just experience, right? You know. Proving it upwards, that's a different answer, and that's a whole other story, and that's the challenge, right? So I think, and that's, I think, where we struggle. That has not been solved. That
Yeah.
has not been right. So there are things that you can do, and obviously the different platforms have brand lift surveys, and there are tools that offer these, or say at least that they offer insight. But the kind of good and bad thing about data, also, when you're talking about things that are much easier to measure, data is, you know, it'll say whatever you want it to say, as long as you kind of slice it up and look at it from the right direction, right? So depending on what you're kind of trying to prove, or kind of your mindset, you can, unless it's very clear cut, you can probably get data to say a whole lot, uh, looking from the left, or a whole something else looking from the right. So that's, I think, that's the answer to that question. It has two answers. One is like experience, and the other is I
We're
don't
still
know.
solving. Yeah, listen, I
We're
couldn't have
still
said
we're
it. We're
still
still
solving.
solving. And I think I couldn't have said it better myself. Now, listen, you're leading the marketing team in Israel for Cisco. And I don't think that
Mhm.
there's one marketer. I'd be very surprised. I shouldn't make an assumption, but I'd be very surprised if there wasn't anybody that doesn't know the name Cisco. In your
Yeah.
opinion, how much brand work do brands such as Cisco really need to be doing? Because you are pretty much a household name.
So Cisco, like you said, first of all, Cisco, it is a household name, right? And especially, I guess, more in North America than anywhere else in the world, but specifically in Israel, and also probably around the world. Cisco has been around for a really long time. People sometimes don't understand how big a company it is. They don't understand how many products. Cisco has probably upwards of 3,000 products, right? And they vary. They move from, collaboration tools and phone systems and switchers and routers, and there's software in there for, I don't know, like there's cybersecurity and protecting endpoint, but also firewall. So it's very, very varied. So the question is not, how how many people know the name Cisco. Is the question really is, I think, do they know what we want them to know? Like,
Mm.
depending on what their job is, because Cisco it's a B2B company, right? So we sell to businesses. So depending on what their positions are and the companies that they work for, do they know the brand well enough to understand what we want them to understand? Do they understand that Cisco is where you go to buy firewalls? Because even if they know Cisco and they think that Cisco is probably the best company in the world to buy this router or this switch or this, I don't know, communication system or WebEx it's a Cisco product. So I mean, if they're a cybersecurity person, if they work on the, security team, or if they're the CISO or CIO, if they don't understand that Cisco is also where we want them to, buy the firewall from, then they might not know it at all. It might be even harder to kind of get them focused around the products that we need them to know and understand the features for. Because if you're not known at all, right, then the challenge is introducing the brand. If you're known as brand A, but you also sell B or C or D, getting people to kind of focus on the solution that we want you to focus on, it can be a bigger challenge than being unknown completely.
Mm-hmm.
It's also, like Cisco has been around for a really long time, and it's changed a lot over the years, right? It's not always the same. And right now, Cisco is kind of in a software renaissance where we have a lot of software products, but we're very well known for being a hardware, company. So it's Cisco. It needs brand work. It might not be the same kind of brand work that's required if you're an unknown company, but it's definitely brand work.
Absolutely. So listen, from where you sit, right? How would you measure brand? I know you mentioned earlier that there are tools out there that could help measure, the uplift of brand. But
Yeah.
for you, like what are you specifically looking at that would define success, right? Because I think we spoke earlier about this and you had mentioned, right? Going from 0 to 100 is impressive, but also for larger brands going from maybe 100 to like 100.75 can also be impressive. So as you lead your team, how are you defining that success?
So really it's around getting the customer engagement around the products that are relevant for those customers and for those specific audiences. And this is why I talk a lot about brand trust, right? Like Apple is a computer company. Like, why would you buy a phone from a computer company? But really, we do it every single day, right? Like,
Good point. I never even thought of that.
right, exactly. So it's maybe a good kind of analogy for Cisco. Yes, Cisco is a company that will sell routers and switches, but it will also sell firewalls. And why would you buy a firewall from a routers company? But again, we do it every day. So I mean,
Yeah.
how do we measure? We measure engagement with the brand specific to the segment, the technology that you are a part of, and then we go from there.
That's a really, I'm like staring at my iPhone now and you just open a can of worms on me. Like why would I just buy this blindly? Brand trust, right? Just to level set, what is it? And then in terms of building it, like if you've been doing this for so long, let's say if you know what you know, I'm going to rephrase the question a little. If you know what you know today about building brand trust, what do you think you would have done differently earlier on in your career?
Oh man. Oh man.
Maybe this needs to be an episode in itself.
Yeah, we might need to make this an episode. Okay, so you asked a few questions in here, right? So let's kind of take them one at a time, if that makes sense, or if that's okay. So what was the first question?
The first,
really
just in general, just to level set, right? What is brand trust? Okay,
so that's a good question. I know how I define brand trust, right? And this is the definition I use. I like I like kind of starting with definitions because it means that everyone is on the same page. So for me, brand trust, or the way that I define brand trust, is the belief that a company's products or service will consistently meet or exceed your expectations as a customer,
Nice.
right? So that's what brand trust is to me. It might vary slightly for different people, but essentially, if I, let's use the Apple example, right? If I am an Apple customer, brand trust is the belief that whatever I buy from Apple, it can be a computer, it can be a cell phone, whatever I buy from Apple, those products will meet my expectations or exceed them. That's brand trust. And that's why it's so important, especially for two kinds of companies, really, as far as I see it. And again, these are my opinions. I'm happy to have the debate. I love talking about this stuff. But for me, there are really two kinds of companies that this matters for. First is companies that have more than one product, right? Or have more than, or are working in more than one kind of world of content. This is Apple, but this can also be Uber, right? There's Uber, kind of the company that you hail a cab with, right? This is the company that you order a cab with, but there's also Uber Eats, and they have other products, right? They deliver, they do all kinds of things. So for companies that have more than one content world within those worlds they operate in, again, for Cisco, this can be, hardware and software. We work in both. So for companies that are consistently developing new products in new architectures, new segments, things like that, you want to make sure that you're doing that brand trust work, because what you don't want is having to do that work every single time for every single kind of line of products that you have. You don't want to do the work for the Apple computers, the Macs, and then do the same exact work, spend another same exact amount of money doing the work for the iPhone. You trust the company, right? You know as a customer that these products will meet or exceed your expectations. The other kinds of companies that I think this is really, really important for is companies where their business model is monthly, right? So it's a monthly subscription, or it's something that you pay at certain kind of checkpoints. You're not committed to any specific time frame. You get charged on a continuous basis, and this can be monthly, this can be quarterly, whatever. But these are companies where you're asking customers to keep paying you over and over and over again. And Netflix might be a good example of this, right? So as a customer, I trust Netflix that even after my payment date of, I don't know what it is now, it's like $8 a month or something like that. When I go into a new month of payment, because I'm paying up front, right? So when I go into a new month of payment, there will be content there that I will enjoy every month consistently. And because once there isn't, then they're going to lose me as a customer. They're asking for my trust every single month. So I'm not, specifically relying on, a specific show. I'm trusting Netflix as a company to keep producing content, or to keep buying content that is relevant for me and that I enjoy. So this is why I'm saying brand trust is important for specifically for these two kinds of companies. There are obviously others, and it's important for everyone. Everyone wants their customers to trust their brand, but for these companies, and especially if you're a company that's planning on future expansions or testing business models that you're not working within right now, this is something that you want to think about regardless of what what business models you're using, because things change and you adapt and you move on. And but for specifically companies where you keep asking for trust, you want to make sure that you have that trust early on, and you're meeting expectations consistently, but you don't have to prove yourself every single time.
Yeah, I think that consistency is definitely key, right? Because as
Yeah,
you mentioned, right?
right.
I mean, at the end of the day, that's key. No, point taken, point stop. So I want to go back because I think the question around, is there something that you can share with us that perhaps when you started out, maybe you didn't quite know, or you wish you would have known, because you have so many years in branding, you have so many years of marketing experience.
Yeah.
What's like one thing that you wish you would have known then that you know now that you think would have helped then?
Um, One thing as a marketing leader that I wish I would have known at the beginning. Okay, this this kind of varies a little bit from the questions, but I think I would have been, or let me rephrase that.
Go for it.
There are two kinds of marketers, right? There's jack of all trades, master of none, and then there are the people who kind of specify and are extremely knowledgeable and professional, and have a lot of expertise around a certain subject in marketing, right? Or a certain kind of practice in marketing. So I think that more so when I became a marketing leader rather than when I started. But as a marketing leader, I wish I would have understood the difference between these a little bit more in depth and a little bit earlier on. And they're both fine, right? We need both, but I was not the first to say, and I won't be the last to say, like, hiring people and then like professionals that know a lot about what they do and then telling them how to do their job is like a huge waste of time. So I understanding kind of these two aspects of marketing where you either specialize or you're kind of like
Generalist.
generalized. Hire people who specialize and don't tell them how to do their jobs, because it's not a good waste. It's not a good way for you to spend your time as a marketing leader, right? Focus on leading, focus on um, building value, building strategy for the marketing team that kind of coincides with the business strategy of the company. That's the position of the marketing leader. And then let the people who are experts teach you, not don't teach them,
I
right?
love
And
that.
it's not a requirement also. Like, you don't need to know everything really, really well if you're not that person, right? You don't need to understand or to know how to do PPC and SEO and be the best content writer in the world and do creative and all these different marketing things, and you like know how to manage communities but also manage social. And like, marketing is very, very, very wide. And sometimes, like, now it's kind of trendy to call them full stack marketers, right? But
Yeah.
what does that exactly mean? I mean, you can be a full stack marketer, and I kind of see myself as, someone who has done a lot of these different things, especially when you're kind of in the world of startups.
Yeah.
You tend to do, right? You tend to do a lot of everything, right? Because there's no like specific dedicated person for, the community management and then also the social management. A lot of the times these are the same person. Um, so I see myself as someone like in practice have done a lot of these things myself, but it's, I think, a good distinction to kind of have and to understand and have that conversation with management teams and with marketing teams, and understand who's good at what. Hire the best people you can to do as much as possible in their realm of expertise, and don't bring on people and then tell them how to do what they're experts at. Like,
I love that radical transparency there. I mean, I think that's some of the best radical transparency we've had on the season, on the show in general. I mean, it's so
oh
true.
yay.
Speaking of jobs, you know, I think it's definitely we're kicking off into 2023 into a time where there is definitely uncertainty. People are a little nervous, especially marketers. We know, and there's always this running joke that when budgets get cut, marketing is usually the first to go. How can marketers today safeguard their jobs, in your opinion, and provide value?
Um, okay, so I have an answer for this. It's layered, right? And I'll start like at the very, very top, and then I'll go down to the bottom. And this is truer, this is true for everyone. It doesn't matter if you are, a single marketing person in a startup company of 10 people, or you're, a marketing leader at Cisco, which is a huge company. And, we're all kind of like we're sliced up into countries, and then theaters, and then regions, and right it's expensive. So how do we make sure that we are not the first people to lose our jobs in a crisis?
Yeah.
And the answer to that is really around value. You have to make sure that as marketing professionals, you are providing value. Um, and this is why it's harder for brand people to kind of show rather than lead gen people. But if you're the value, again, from the very, very top to the bottom, the value of marketing is in supporting the business goals of the company, right? So at the very top, it's a little bit easier to kind of show that, right? You're building marketing programs, and you're building marketing strategies that support the business strategy of a company. So being the person building those plans and strategies, and then kind of presenting them to the management team. Maybe you're a part of the management team. Maybe, you're brought in to showcase these plans to an existing management team. It's easier to show, right? This is the plan I built. These are our goals for 2023, 2024, 2025. These programs will ensure that we hit our goals. And that's really where the value of marketing generally lies. And then kind of drilling down into that, there are, how are you supporting the marketing plan and the programs that were built specifically to support the company goals? And if you are working on a team that is not supporting the company goals, then when we look at, making people redundant, those are the first people that get redundant. People who are not
Right.
actively supporting, right, throughout kind of the day, the week, the month, the year, whatever. Like, and on any given day, you can do different things, but in kind of like looking at a month or looking at a quarter, if you're waking up today and saying like, did I support the plan that brings value to the company, or am I working on a program that is not bringing value to the company or will bring value in the very, very, very far future?
Yeah.
Then yeah, I mean, you're the person. You're
Yeah.
the person.
Yeah.
Especially if you're working, if you're working on a team of multiple people doing kind of the same thing. Same, like, are you the person who is bringing value? And it's easy to kind of say this. I can just hear like, my teams, past and present, saying like, of course I bring value. What do you mean? Obviously, like, otherwise what am I doing here? But we're talking about radical transparency. Like, you need to be honest with yourself. And if you're not, then make sure that you course correct quickly. Or, companies they're in different stages right now, right? You can have a really long runway with lots of cash to burn, or you can be at the end of that runway and kind of people are, at the top are looking at, where they can cut costs and who they can let go. Make sure that tomorrow you are working on something that brings value.
I think that's a good point, right? At the end of the day, I know I have a little um, you can call a ceremony, tradition, habit that I like will take a notebook and I'll write down kind of everything, that I need to do for the next day. And I always try to highlight, right, what are the most valuable pieces of what I'm doing for tomorrow? What do I need? If someone from management were to come down to my office tomorrow and ask what I'm working on, what are the top 3 things that I know are contributing to the company's bottom line or the company's goals or the most impressive thing that I know is making impact? And I just know right what those are. So at the drop of a hat, right? Coffee cooler talk. I know many of us are hybrid, but like if anybody were to ask me, right, what are you working on? You always want to make sure that you have that kind of one foot forward and making sure that you're always providing value. And I think especially as a marketer and going back to us brand professionals, right? Especially as branding professionals, because it's so hard to earn a seat at the strategy table, I think, as a brand specialist. With
Oh,
that said, Talia, I want to thank you so much for joining us, but I'm not letting you off the hook yet. I have one last question that I
okay.
love asking our guests. So obviously when I was searching, like, who can I bring on this show to talk about brand? And, I went to your LinkedIn and it's super impressive. And trust me, I run it front, back, forwards, inside out. So what's one thing that you can tell us about yourself that we actually can't learn about you from LinkedIn?
That's a really hard question for me to answer, actually. I mean, obviously, like, I can talk about hobbies. Obviously, I have them. I love listening to podcasts, and I can kind of list them and run off the list. But what I if we're talking about bringing value, I guess I think one thing that is something that you can't learn about me from my LinkedIn profile is connecting with bringing value, is that it's really important for me, and I do my very, very best to stay kind of educated around my subject matter expertise. So marketing in general, but specifically like measurements, uh, metrics, strategy building, things like that. Like, these are things that I do actively every week to kind of stay on top of them and make sure that I am familiar with the latest studies, the latest literature, case studies from other companies, competitors and non-competitors, right? Like, just similar. I'm do my best to kind of engage with marketing communities. So kind of staying educated around marketing is something that is really important to me. I don't know if you can tell from my LinkedIn page. I suspect not. I might
I
need to
didn't
do a
get that
better
vibe.
job. Yeah, yeah, I need to do a better job at reflecting that on my LinkedIn page. Like, that's on me, right? Like, if I were like now in a situation where I, wanted people to know more about me as a professional, like, that would be kind of me dropping the ball, because I think it's a strong point kind of professionally, but it's a hobby, it's kind of a personal belief. I think
I love
that's a good
I think it's a great answer. I definitely wouldn't have. I mean, your passion really bleeds through when it comes to marketing,
okay.
branding, and then like even when we spoke in our mapping call. But I think that's a great kind of thing that I wouldn't necessarily have picked up. And I love that you again were very transparent about, hey, maybe I should put it out there. So thank you for joining us. If anybody listening in wants to continue the conversation or ask some questions or maybe even talk brand, what's the best place to reach you?
Probably LinkedIn is the best place, right? Just drop me a message and I will do my best to respond. It gets busy in there sometimes, but hey, I answered you, right? So, like,
It's true, right?
yeah, that's how we connected. So I'm pretty, like, I love LinkedIn. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful tool professionally, and I do my very, very best to kind of stay on top of it. So the best place would probably be LinkedIn. So drop me a message and I will do my very best to respond.
Talia, thank you so much for getting radically transparent. It was a blast.
I had a great time. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for tuning in to the Radically Transparent podcast brought to you by Octopost, the only social media management and employee advocacy platform architected for B2B. I'm Jennifer Gutman, your host and director of social strategy here at Octopost. And if you love today's show, we'd love if you subscribe, rate, and give a raving review wherever you get your podcasts. For more discussion on B2B social media marketing, be sure to follow Octopost on LinkedIn. And of course, to gain access to all our free social media marketing and employee advocacy resources, head on over to our website, www.octopost.com. Until next time.